Warning. The following video contains massive Danganronpa spoilers for everything except V3, including the anime, novels, and Danganronpa Zero. Viewer discretion is advised if you haven't watched or played the things up till that point. The spoilers will involve characters, plot points, and everything in between, so please be careful. Danganronpa is a game series that was originally created in 2010. There are three main games: Danganronpa 1, Trigger Happy Havoc, Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair, and Danganronpa V3, Killing Harmony. But those aren't the only three things in the series. In fact, Danganronpa 3 has an anime, which is broken up into the Despair arc and the Future arc, and the very last episode that concludes everything, which is the Hope arc. And there's also a spin-off game called Ultra Despair Girls, not to mention there were other mangas and comics and novels and stuff that were released. I recently just finished watching a video describing the entire timeline of Danganronpa minus V3 because I haven't gotten there yet, and I've gotten around to thinking about what the series actually is about. Of course, there is the obvious, hope and despair and the constant battle between them, but I think there's a lot more to uncover from this, and it's actually pretty meaningful if you think about it and realistic to the real world. So I'm here to talk about what Danganronpa really showed me, and of course, spoilers for the entire series except for V3. So if you haven't finished any of that yet, here's your warning. So let's jump straight into it, because we're going to have a lot to cover. I'm going to try and keep this in 20 minutes, but something tells me I will kind of go past that. Of course, as usual, when I talk about these things, I don't normally script my videos because I like to just pour my thoughts out and edit them later. So if you hear me, pausing like exactly what I'm doing right now, you get the idea. Danganronpa is an amazing series, and honestly, ever since I got into Steven Universe, I haven't been obsessed with anything quite as much as I have been with Danganronpa. I do love other things as well, of course, but Danganronpa has been a main obsession of mine for almost 6 months now. And for good reason, at least for me, because it's such an amazing series. When you think something is over, when you think there are no possible further mysteries to uncover, the series throws you another curveball, and you're like, wait, what? I didn't see that coming! So, let's get started. Danganronpa is a story about the apocalypse, to put it simply. It's about how the world ended and how everyone gave in to despair. It is called the biggest, most awful, most tragic event in human history, or simplified to the tragedy, but I love to just call it the apocalypse. But back to the original story. All of the characters, or at least most of them, attended a prestigious academy, a school called Hope's Peak Academy. It was built on the premise that it was meant to nurture young talent all across Japan, to bring hope to the world. I'm not going to go into detail about the timeline and school and everything. I'll link the video I watched down in the description if you want to know about that. But let's just say that there are lots of characters. In fact, I've lost count of them all. Some of them are just side characters or just mentioned in backstories. Others play minor roles, and still others have major roles. In fact, there's so many characters that have major roles that it's really hard to count them. There are the students of Class 77, aka the eventual remnants of Despair, who are featured in Super Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair, who are also featured in the Despair arc of the Danganronpa 3 anime as students in Class 77 before they got corrupted by Despair. There is Chisa, who is their teacher at the time. There is Class 78, who are the participants of Trigger Happy Havoc, the first Danganronpa game, which if you haven't watched or played the series and you're still watching this anyway and spoiling yourself, you're probably wondering why they're the first and not the second participants of the killing game. Wouldn't 77 come before 78? Everything will make sense. But anyway, Then there is Jin Kirigiri, who is the headmaster of Hope's Peak Academy. Of course, Junko Inoshima, who is the main antagonist, and her twin sister Mukuro Ikusaba. These are the Despair Sisters. They are also part of Class 78 and totally did not initiate the entire end of the world thing. I mean, it's totally not them, right? Anyway, there are former alumni like Sakakura and Marakura. I hope I pronounced those names right because I'm horrible with some of these pronunciations and I apologize beforehand. There are the Little Ultimates who are from the elementary school branch of Hope's Peak Academy, such as Monica Toa and the other Warriors of Hope whose names I have a horrible time pronouncing. But among them are Nagisa and Kotoko. Then there are a lot of other students as well, such as Junko's childhood friend, whose name I also can't pronounce. I am so sorry. There are just so many. And a lot of others. But those are just a few of the many students. There's of course also the parents and siblings of each of these characters, who will also become important side characters. And, well, in some cases, important main characters, like Hiroko, Hagakure, Hiro's mom. But there's of course also the mascots like Monokuma and Usami/Monami. Oh, did I mention Chiaki, that just innocent being who we all have to love and protect because she is innocent and beautiful. And anyway, I'm not going to go on a fangirl here. Back to the main story. As there are so many characters, you can imagine that all of them play some role or other. Like I said, some of them have major roles, some of them have minor roles, but what's important that I'm going to talk about is the kinds of roles they play. Of course, we have the typical protagonists, antagonists, and side characters, but they're slightly different from any other media I've consumed so far. Usually, the protagonist is someone who's very caring and optimistic, and for all intents and purposes, that's who Makoto Naegi is, the main protagonist of Trigger Happy Havoc and the Future Arc. But he's not the only protagonist that has ever graced the series. There's Kamaru Naegi, who is his younger sister and the main protagonist of Ultra Despair Girls, and of course, there is Hajime Hinata, who is the main protagonist of Super Danganronpa 2. There is Ryoko, who is, spoiler alert for Danganronpa 0 if you've made it this far, but you haven't gotten to that and you don't want to be spoiled. Ryoko, who is actually Junko with her memories wiped, who's also a really interesting protagonist, and she isn't exactly positive at all. In fact, she just wanted to escape all of the craziness around her because she doesn't remember that she kind of caused it in the first place. And there are a lot more too. Chisa could be considered a protagonist for the Despair arc, seeing as she's very important. In fact, she might as well be because she's investigating the happenings in Hope's Peak Academy during that time. And there are lots of others as well, but these are the main ones. Of course, there are like smaller novels and things that got released, like Kill la Killer, and there's a protagonist there too, but I haven't actually gotten into that, but I only know about it because I watched the timeline video, which I don't mind doing. Anyway, there are many different kinds of protagonists, and even though Makoto fit the optimistic, caring type, there are lots of different kinds as well. There are protagonists that didn't want to be protagonists to begin with. Take Kamaru, who just wanted to get out of there, out of Tower City, where she had been captured for a year and a half. Take Hajime, who was just really lost about what happened when he got put into the New World program. And of course, there is Chisa, who I guess she didn't consider herself this positive, optimistic, trying to save everyone, but because she cared for everyone, she just went for it to begin with. Unlike Makoto, who felt like he had to help, Chisa is just a teacher, and she also wanted to investigate everything, so it was just part of her role, really. I love Chisa, by the way. She's amazing. Anyway, there are many different kinds of protagonists, and they're all different, with different motives, with different starting points, with different stories and arcs, and how they got to where they are. Oh, did I forget to mention that Hajime was also Izuru Kamakura, who totally wasn't involved in some of the craziness that happened on the villain side? Speaking of villains, there are many different kinds of antagonists as well. But when you think of Danganronpa, and if you know the series very well, you know that the main villain is Junko Enoshima, the ultimate despair, or under her alias as the ultimate fashionista. Along with her twin sister, Mukuro Ikusaba, but everyone seems to forget about Mukuro because she doesn't play that big of a role. But then again, no one really forgets about her because she kind of helped Junko a lot, but at the same time, no one talks about her. But she has her share of fans. Anyway, the Despair Sisters. Unlike most villains who just want to take over the world for some revenge plan, or who think that the world is corrupt and they want to make it in their own image of a better place, well, to be fair, Junko kind of wanted to do that too, but it wasn't for the benefit of the people in the traditional sense. She and Mukuro wanted to pour despair into the world, and the reason they wanted to do that, well, it's because Junko loved despair so much. Everything else that was normal and peaceful was boring. Junko gets bored very easily, and despair was unpredictable and something new to her and something that she just loved. So she wanted to fill the world with despair, and the more she cared about someone, her way of showing her love was to make them feel despair, such as, I don't know, killing her childhood lover and best friend and her sister to make them feel despair, because that was the best way of affection she could possibly show, because she was Junko. And then there's Mukuro, who followed her sister because she felt like, as her sister, she should be there for her, and if no one understood her, then and looked out for her, who would? So Mukuro has been growing up alongside Junko and basically raised to believe that her sister knew what she was doing, and that despair was a good thing, and that everything was, all okay as long as Junko was in control, and she should just follow her sister. Of course, Mukuro had her own thoughts and feelings as well, but she put them aside to help Junko with everything, feeling like this is just how it should be and that it's okay because Junko. And she was just raised to believe that Junko was doing the right thing and that she should just follow Junko. Also, did I mention that Junko puts her down a lot despite all the help she gives her? Like, she often tells her that she's a disappointment and she's not good enough, but because she cares for her sister, Mukuro continues helping anyway, deciding that, if she wasn't gonna do it, who would help Junko? Who would understand her? Mukuro felt like she was the only one who understood her sister's want for despair, and therefore, she had to be the one who was there for her and help her out, because no one else was going to. Of course, there was that childhood best friend as well, but he also ultimately got betrayed. The ultimate neurologist guy whose name I can't pronounce. Anyway, there's him. He also became an antagonist because he was hiding evidence while Junko was Ryoko and trying to protect her as a result. He killed a few people, including the ultimate spy and the head of the student council who survived the massacre of the student council, where, 14 student council members were forced to kill each other. And, of course, Izuru Kamakura could be considered an antagonist as well because of the role he played in all of this. He is kind of a complicated character because he was originally Hajime, who got turned into some ultimate hope person with a lot of talent who just found everything boring because he already knew everything. He was the ultimate hope, ultimate talent and everything. There are also some villains that can be considered antagonists in their respective Danganronpa games, like Nagito Koimaeda, who was acting kinda, weird throughout the whole DR2 when he was like, oh, I'm gonna kill everyone so that there's a stepping stone for hope or something along those lines. I'm not explaining it very well. Then there are villains like that. And of course, Byakuya Togami was messing with the bodies and crime scenes and all that in Danganronpa 1, Trigger Happy Havoc. So I guess nothing he did was as bad compared to what Nagito tried to do, or extreme, I should say. But then again, they're just playing their roles in the story. And honestly, the reason I'm covering the villains and the protagonists like this, you'll see in a little bit. Then there are the characters that kind of fall in between. They aren't necessarily villains or, protagonists. They might be on the side of either, but from the way they act, you might start wondering, what is your deal? For example, there are the more inappropriate characters, like the ultimate spy that was mentioned earlier. He was on the side of the protagonist of Danganronpa Zero with, questionable intentions for payoff for helping Ryoko. Let's just leave it at that. There are also more inappropriate characters that tend to make more inappropriate comments during the series, and whether they're on the side of hope or despair or anywhere in between, still puts them in the spotlight for that specific purpose. But enough about them. There are also people who seem to fluctuate, or who at first seem like they're helping and then turns out to be an antagonist later on for their own motives. Munakata is one such person. He was investigating the problems in Hope's Peak Academy before the biggest, most awful, most tragic event in human history happened, but then eventually decided that he was going to annihilate despair and had a very unhealthy mindset about how to do it, so he ultimately wanted to kill Makoto and everything like that. He kind of got corrupt by his own ideologies and thoughts. Then there are people who you think are antagonists who end up being your friends. Of course, the obvious one would be the ultimate despairs, who were, corrupted by Junko, but who eventually got rehabilitated by the New World program. Spoiler alert, once again, if you haven't finished Danganronpa 3 Future Arc and the Hope Arc that came after it, the ultimate despairs ended up being rehabilitated and waking up from their comatose state and helping to stop Midori. Oh, did I fail to mention him until now? He was technically in a gray area himself. He was manipulated by Junko, but we'll get to him later. They got resurrected. Well, apparently they were able to wake up somehow. I don't really remember exactly if it was mentioned how. I actually don't recall how they woke up, but according to the video I watched, Azuro Kamakura, aka Hajime Hinata, found a way to wake them up. Or maybe they woke up out of their own free will, or maybe it's a mixture of two, who knows, but I like to think Hajime found a way. So, yeah, there are ultimate despairs, like the remnants of despairs, well, not ultimate despairs, the remnants of despair, I apologize, who were at first protagonists, then antagonists, and then protagonists again. And then there was Midori, like I mentioned earlier, who was also a protagonist, and then sort of an accomplice in Junko's plans without having any actual want or intent to do so, but he was kind of manipulated by her and forced to. And then he, in the end, tried to be a protagonist again and tried to brainwash everyone into believing in hope, which obviously wasn't a good thing, so his old classmates tried to bring him back, and he eventually joined them. And then there are betrayals that tend to happen, but as in everything with Danganronpa, everything's not as clear-cut. For example, the Warriors of Hope who worked with Monica Toa eventually realized what she was really up to and decided that they weren't gonna help her anymore. They weren't exactly on the side of the adults or the main protagonists at the time either, but they weren't exactly on Monica's side anymore either, so they were kind of in between. And then there is Toko, who we haven't talked about till now because, well, now it's her time to shine. In the first game, she was just seen as a supporting character, one of the participants of the killing school life. But in Ultra Despair Girls, she was one of the main characters along with Komaru Naegi, and she was apparently told by Nagito and blackmailed into saying, if you bring Komaru to Monica safely, I'll release this captive of mine who happens to be Byakuya. Oh, by the way, the main 6 survivors of the killing game, the first one, Trigger Happy Havoc, they joined the Future Foundation, and Byakuya was there as a rescue mission to rescue Komaru and the other captives who were captured for the killing game that they survived. But he got captured ultimately, and Toko, who had snuck on to the mission without permission, was now trying to rescue him. So if you forgot the context, that's what happened. But in the end, Komaru was able to win her over with friendship, and they ended up trying to take down Monica and everyone else. In the end, they decided to stay in Toa City to try and repair the damage that was caused there. And of course, there are the characters who are also just, entertaining. They're the ones who are really chaotic, who are, whether they're on the side of hope or despair or in between, they just draw your attention as a viewer, and you're just there like, whoa, that character has quite a colorful personality. For example, Hiyoko Saionji sometimes has a bit of a loudmouth mean side that a lot of people tend to hate her for. But I find her own charm. I find charm in her as well. Not that I think calling someone a pig barf is a good thing, though. And I love voicing her because she's just really fun to voice. And then, of course, Junko, the main antagonist that we mentioned earlier, loves to create many different personalities. Speaking of many of Junko's personalities, she of course created the personality of Monokuma, who is the main bear antagonist thing in basically the series. He's also the mascot of despair and what Junko uses to represent herself all the time. Monokuma may be a villain, but he's super entertaining that you sometimes kind of wish he wasn't a villain, but he is. And then, speaking of mascots, there's also Monami, and then there's Shirokuma, and the other bear whose name I forgot. And those have their own roles to play as well. Monami/Usami is the opposite of Monokuma. She's just really caring, really innocent, sweet, and lovable. Because she's just lovable and adorable. And the others, well, I'm not going to say anything about the others because they're not mainly focused, but they have interesting personalities of their own. Shirokuma appears all sweet, and the other bear is just very talkative. So they're very entertaining. All the mascots are super entertaining. Apart from the super entertaining characters, there are also the cinnamon rolls, the ones who appeared like they could do no wrong and, as a result, either got corrupted or met horrible fates, such as Chiaki Nanami, the class representative of Class 77. So, obviously she had to go because she was so nice and brought everyone together and everything. Junko used her death to corrupt everyone else in her class into despair. And of course there's Chisa, who I mentioned earlier, a sweet, caring teacher who was the ultimate housekeeper, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, she's the ultimate housekeeper. And she was so sweet and caring, but she ultimately got corrupted by despair as well. But enough about all the different kinds of characters. What's really interesting about Danganronpa is what all of them do. Like I mentioned earlier, there are the main protagonists, the main antagonists, and the main, supporting characters, side characters, other main characters, other main side villain characters, and so on and so forth. There are adults, teenagers, and even children involved in this entire story, all of them, mostly, if not all, affiliated with Hope's Peak Academy in one way or another. All of them had an important role to play, and regardless of the kind of personality they all have different ways of approaching situations. For example, not all the characters with very outgoing, talkative personalities are good or bad. Not all the characters who are cinnamon rolls turn out good or bad either. Not all the optimistic characters turn out optimistic in the end. Not all the protagonists are protagonists. Not all the antagonists turn out to be antagonists, and so on. It really goes to show that there are all these characters with different personalities, different ways of viewing things, and yet it all comes down to their choices, what role they play in the story. Whether they're a villain or a protagonist or a side character, all comes down to the choices they decided to make, not the kind of person they are on the surface. Makoto could have easily given in to despair, but he chose hope instead. It was his choice to be positive and optimistic because that's just who he is deep down. Then there is Junko, who seems so outgoing and all that, but she's far from friendly. She chose to go down the path of despair. And then there are characters who acted because they were manipulated or brainwashed. For example, Midori, who was manipulated by Junko to use his anime and animation abilities to bring despair to the world. He didn't actually want to do it. In fact, he seemed like a kind and caring and even timid, passionate individual. But just because he was that kind of person didn't mean he couldn't be an accomplice or manipulated. In fact, he was one of the reasons the whole tragedy took place at all, because of his videos. Not blaming him, of course, he was manipulated, but different characters' personalities don't define what kind of choices they are going to make, what role they are going to play in a specific story or situation. What Danganronpa really showed me, and the point that I've been trying to get up till now, is that you can't judge a book by its cover. Just because someone appears kind and friendly doesn't mean they are going to always be a good person. And just because someone appears sinister doesn't mean they are necessarily bad people. Look at someone like, I don't know, I can't really think of an example actually. But there are characters out there in Danganronpa like that. They appear so good and optimistic at first, and they can fall to despair because of manipulation, or they can be bad at first and then learn their lessons. In real life, it's pretty much the same. Someone you know at one point could be a good person, but because of something that happens that could be either out of their control or a choice they make, it could change them forever, for better or for worse. Makoto Naegi was a prime example of someone who was just an ordinary person, but because of the good choices he made, and because of how positive he chose to be, it led him onto the path of being the ultimate hope. Junko, on the other hand, was born like everyone else, but because everything was boring to her and she could analyze situations so well that she just got bored of everything, she wanted to plunge the world into despair. Who we are is a combination of nature and nurture, and Danganronpa displays that very well. Some characters do the right thing, some do the wrong thing. Some are strangely inappropriate. Some are just in gray areas. There are those who choose to fight. There are those who choose to stay back. There are those who eventually got inspired to become better. There are those who eventually got corrupted to be worse. There are those who tried to make things better but ultimately made things worse as a result. There are those who tried to make things better but in an effort to do so didn't realize they were getting corrupted by their own mindset, and what they perceive as better isn't what everyone else perceives as better. Take Munakata. There are those who have been raised to believe that they are inferior, but who eventually rise to the top and who learn that they are not as bad as everyone thinks they are, or that they can do something after all. Take Toko Fukawa. There are those who have been raised to feel like they are better than everyone else. There are those who are raised to feel like everyone else around them are just peasants, like Byakuya was eventually just taught as he experienced his life. There are those who were raised to believe that they are just average, like Makoto and Kamaru. And then there are those who were raised to believe that they have to follow family traditions, like Kyoko. There are others who are passionate. There are others who just couldn't care less about anything. There are those who do things out of love, whether good or evil. There are also those who do things out of love because out of hatred. Sorry, not love. I just mentioned love. There are those who do things out of love, and there are those who do things out of hatred, whether good or evil. For example, Mukuro. She was assisting Junko with everything because she cared about her. But as a result, she followed Junko in doing all the heinous crimes that Junko eventually wanted to commit. This was an act of evil, and it was something bad, but she did it because she cared for her sister. And then, of course, helping your friends is an act of love for good. Then there are those characters who just hate everything and just want to destroy everything. But that doesn't mean they are necessarily villains at first. They might just have a twisted mindset of what is good. Munakata wanted to destroy all despair, but he thought that the right way to do that was murder all the despairs, which obviously wasn't exactly the most morally right thing to do. So, just because someone plans to do good doesn't mean they will. And just because someone plans to do bad doesn't mean that they are doing it because they have an evil heart either. There are many, many gray areas, and every Danganronpa character has a motive to do what they do, whether it be because of their past, influence around them, or simply because they got corrupted. Or they could even just feel like it's their personal belief system that's influencing them. They might feel like they have to do something because that's how they've always viewed the world. They also might just feel like they have to do it for a loved one or for themselves to protect themselves. I know for a fact that some murders took place in the future arc to protect oneself. So, what I really got out of Danganronpa is that every character, every person in this story is a person, regardless of what they do. They are people who made different choices, and these choices can be classified under good, bad, or somewhere in between. But regardless of what their choices are, good or bad, or in between, or unclassifiable, they all had a reason. Some reasons are just, some reasons are corrupt, some reasons are just outright crazy. Other reasons are more sensible, but that doesn't mean it was right or wielded good results. Some reasons can be misunderstood. Some reasons have started with good intent but turned bad, and vice versa. Everyone at the end of the day is just a person, but what really defines us in a story is our choices, our choice of action, what we choose to do. We are not always able to choose the circumstances we are placed in, but we can always choose our choices. Makoto could have given in to despair, like I said before, but he did not choose that, which was what led to him being the ultimate hope. Of course, there's also the fact that he was positive, but that's just his personality and belief system speaking. Because, like I said, more than one thing influences a choice. Same goes with every antagonist. Everyone started out as just a person. That's what Danganronpa showed us, because at the very beginning, we see every character just living out their lives before something happens to them which forces them to make a choice, whether it is to be a good person, to be the ultimate despair, to spy on what's going on, to do detective work on what's going on, to try and help everyone, to try and help the ultimate despairs destroy everyone, to try and help the ultimate despairs because they want to cover their own tracks. Take Sakakura, who wanted his secret to be kept a secret. And there are so many other reasons. The Warriors of Hope decided to destroy adults because they had horrible experience with them in their childhood, and they got manipulated to believe that that was the best course of action, to create, in their minds, a paradise for children that is away from adults. But what caused them to make this choice? What caused the manipulation to be even possible? It's their pasts. And what causes some of the other characters to act the way they do? It's also their pasts. Take Mondo Owada, who accidentally killed Chihiro because he was haunted by his own personal insecurities and past. Take other characters like that. Celestia Ludenberg, who wanted to accomplish her dream but didn't do it in the best way possible. By the way, if you want to know more about Celeste and what really went through her mind, I made an entire video about that, which I will also link in the description. And then there are other characters who, for example, Sakura Ogami, who committed suicide, but not because she wanted to die. No, she did it because she wanted to fulfill her deal with Monokuma to kill someone while also protecting and reuniting her fellow classmates. What's usually seen as a bad act can be done for good. What's usually seen as a good act can turn corrupt or bad. What everyone does has a reason, and all of these reasons are what led to them making their choices. At the end of the day, everyone is a person with a story and their own emotions. Not everything that everyone does is going to be good or beneficial, but at the end of the day, we gotta remember that they're all human, because they all have a reason to do what they do, whether good, evil, or anywhere in between. thank you so much for listening. That is what Danganronpa has taught me, and it actually applies a lot to the real world as well. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and liking it, and turn on the notification bell to receive more notifications whenever I upload. I don't normally make content like this, but there are times when I make videos analyzing characters or stories or anything like this sort. This is one of the rare occasions where I make one of these, but I have made them in the past. I will link the Celeste video plus the video of the timeline that I watched, which got me to come to this conclusion because I got to see everything all in one video, down below in the description. So thank you so much for watching once again. I love Danganronpa, it's one of my favorite series ever, and you know, if you love it too, I'd love to discuss it down in the comments. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Goodbye!